Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Australia-Chile webinar on the role of TVET in responding to the challenges and seizing opportunities brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's just take a minute or two for everyone to sign up.
Hello. Hola, hola.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. ¿Cómo están?
Hola.
Hola, Gonzalo. Hola, Katy. ¿Cómo están?
Bien, gracias.
Hello, Gabriela. We have attendees joining now. We are about to start. Good to have you with us.
Okay.
Ya tenemos como 70 participantes.
We'll just wait one more minute.
Gonzalo, hay participantes abajo. Tú aprietas y...
Ya lo estoy viendo.
Ah, lo estáis viendo ya.
Rodrigo Jarufe is like 10 times present.
That's right.
Something wrong with Rodrigo.
So we'll be starting shortly, everyone. Just a few more, well, a minute or two, just to let everyone join. We had a lot of registrations, over 100. So we might just let everybody sign up. It's great to have you all today.
Tuvimos el otro día, Gonzalo, a Marcelo von Christmas, lo invité a última hora y por suerte podía, así que se subió.
Ah, sí. Qué bueno, qué bueno.
Y Alejandro Espejo también. Alejandro Espejo también.
Sí, ahí está. Entonces, todo el grupo del consejo. Qué bueno. Alejandro va dejándole el espacio ahí a Marcelo, que van a hacer buena
Sí, no,
pega.
sí. Ya ocurrió ese cambio ya.
Qué bien. Qué bien. Pero, ¿estuviste con ellos a propósito de algo de la fundación?
Alejandro Espejo lo veo con alguna frecuencia.
Ah, ya.
Conversamos temas, en fin. Pasó también que mi señora con él también era consejera del Consejo Nacional de Educación, por temas de sistema escolar, así que también se conocieron mucho y conversamos ahí varias veces.
Ah, mira.
Pero ahí de vez en cuando voy a donde Alejandro, ahí filosofamos un rato.
Sí, pues estuve estudiando filosofía, toda una
Yo creo
preocupación.
que está todavía en eso. Sí, está escribiendo una tesis, creo. Sí. A Marcelo no lo he visto hace mucho tiempo.
Ahí está Marcelo, está bien. Estuvimos hace poco con él.
Ya.
Está con hartas ganas de hacer esa pega y de apoyar. Así que
ya.
Creo que hace buen aporte.
Qué bueno.
Buen equipo ese. ¿Tú Hernán, estaba ahí en los tiempos? Bueno,
Just,
hablamos después.
Después hablamos.
Just letting, I think we have quite a few of our participants. We're still trying to get two panelists online, but probably they are here. If they could raise their hands so we can identify them among the attendees, that would be great. And we'll be starting shortly. And apologies on the delay. We just want to make sure that everything is ready before we start. I think we're right now, and they came under my name. So I will rename that.
¿Sabes qué? Iwa.
Yes, we're ready. That's great. Double checking that.
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. Apologies, everyone. We're ready to go. So hello, everyone. Welcome to good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the second of the two webinars on the role of TVET in responding to the challenges and seizing opportunities brought by the COVID-19 pandemic, sharing of experiences and best practices between Australia and Chile. My name is Eva Filipiak. I'm the International Director at TAFE Directors Australia. TAFE Directors Australia is the national peak body representing public training institutions in Australia. And we are delighted to be organizing this webinar series with our Chilean partners, Fundación Chile, Vertebral, and CFTech. The objective of the webinar is to share sector trends and best practices between Australia and Chile and identify potential collaboration opportunities between our two countries. Last week, we already had a very fruitful session, and I'll pass the floor shortly to Mr. Hernan Araneda to speak a few words and to provide a quick overview of our findings. And today's topic is on online and blended learning and TVET, sharing of best practices between Chile and Australia, a topic I believe is very relevant for many of us around the world in those pandemic times. So I would like to thank the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs for funding this webinar series through the Council on Australia-Latin America Relations. It's our COALAR grant. And I would just like to say a few make some housekeeping remarks. So firstly, the session is translated. You can access your language channel if you click on at the bottom of your screen on the right. There you can choose English or Spanish. So for most of you, it will be Spanish to hear the simultaneous translation. The session is also being recorded, and we will be circulating the recording to you after we finished. And finally, we will have 2 Q&A sessions. So please don't hesitate to put any questions or comments you may have in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. And I am also very happy to have, apart from our speakers from Australia and Hernan Araneda, who will be doing his introductory remark, to have 2 representatives of Chilean TVET providers. So many thanks to Gonzalo Tomarelli to join us today. Gonzalo is the General Secretary of the Board of Vertebral, and he will be making some comments later during the session on behalf of the network. And we also have Catherine Flores, who's representing the public training providers of Chile and CFTech, and who is the academic coordinator at CFT Valparaíso. Many thanks, Catherine, to be here with us today. And now I'll pass on the floor for some opening remarks to Hernan Araneda, who's the Manager, Human Development Center at Fundación Chile. Many thanks, Hernan.
Gracias, Iva. Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todas y todos. Es un gran placer reunirnos nuevamente y como decía Iva, tuvimos una reunión muy fructífera la semana pasada con autoridades de las instituciones que están aquí hoy día presentes y pudimos conocer cuál fue la aproximación de Australia y el sector de la educación técnica a nivel superior para enfrentar el COVID. Conocimos un caso muy exitoso, con muchas lecciones interesantes para nosotros, y también cuáles de esas lecciones son más permanentes, no son cosas que ya quedaron atrás, ya que Australia está en una etapa bastante más avanzada de control de la pandemia, ¿no? Y discutimos algunas de esas lecciones y las compartimos con el caso de las instituciones en Chile. Entonces, fue una primera mirada más general, ahí salieron. La pregunta que nos hacíamos era, bueno, esto del COVID ¿son puras restricciones o también uno puede verlo como una oportunidad de innovación, entendiendo que cuando se requieren respuestas nuevas para problemas nuevos, bueno, es una oportunidad de innovar, ¿no? Entonces, ¿en qué medida era eso también? Y esas innovaciones en qué ámbitos se estaban dando, y ahí se describieron varias en materias regulatorias, como flexibilizar cosas en los sistemas que regulan la actividad de la formación técnica en ambos países, pero también ciertamente en los temas de docencia, por razones obvias, ¿no es cierto?, del tránsito a las modalidades online y la enorme cantidad de desafíos que eso representaba. Hoy día vamos a profundizar en aquello. Y también Craig, que nos va a hablar hoy día también en algún momento, nos contó la evolución del sistema australiano. El sistema técnico profesional australiano, como todos ustedes saben, ha sido un referente para los que hemos estado en este tema desde hace mucho tiempo, por ser un sistema con algunos atributos que quisiéramos ver en Chile luego, de simplicidad de su organización institucional, de ciertos incentivos bastante bien alineados para que la formación técnica sea de alta calidad y responda a las necesidades del mercado del trabajo, etc. Y nos contó Craig en qué iba eso hoy día. También nos habló el rol que seguía teniendo muy vertebrador del sistema, el marco de cualificaciones, que, bueno, converge mucho con lo que es lo que se está tratando de hacer en Chile hoy día. Así que la verdad que hoy día tenemos una sesión, yo diría que está menos en el nivel de la discusión de política pública y tratamos de entrar a algunos temas más específicos, y por eso tenemos una audiencia mucho más amplia de las instituciones y que esperamos que podamos sacarle el máximo provecho posible. Por la hora, por la diferencia horaria que tenemos, esta es una sesión bastante condensada. Nuestros expositores australianos se ciñen mucho los tiempos, cosa que agradecemos, y vamos a tener que hacerlo con cada una de las sesiones que tengamos para poder alcanzar a terminar esto puntualmente y con los resultados que esperamos. Así que muy bienvenidos a todas y todos, y espero que tengamos una muy, muy buena y excitante reunión.
Many thanks, Hernan. And without further ado, let's start the first session, which focuses on the online learning journey at institutional level. And we have two speakers from TAFE Queensland with us today, who will speak about what has happened in their institution and some lessons learned. So I'd like to first give the floor to Mrs. Shauna Vaughan, who's the Director Operations, currently in PNG of the Australian Pacific Training Coalition, which is an arm of TAFE Queensland, but also in her prior roles very involved in the transition to online. So many thanks, Shauna, and apologies for having kept you waiting. I'm happy to you that with us, and I'll pass you the floor. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eva. Good afternoon, everybody. I will just share my screen and we'll go from there. From the beginning. Okay, so good afternoon. My topic is actually a case study of TAFE Queensland's transition to online learning. Myself, I'm Shona Vaughan, as Eva has indicated, currently actually Director of Operations in Papua New Guinea, but due to the current situation there, I'm not able to be there, so I'm currently still in Brisbane. I have been a business manager and manager within TAFE Queensland Skills Tech, which is a region, for over the last 10 years. Okay, TAFE Queensland is a public provider of vocational education and training, or we refer to it as VET, in Queensland. We have over 125,000 students per year and more than 50 campuses throughout Queensland. TAFE Queensland is actually divided into 6 regions, at each delivering different areas. TAFE Queensland Skills Tech is the trade training area. Okay, so we are located in the southeast bottom of Queensland there. I do actually have a short video that you will be sent that actually does talk about this, but due to being on Zoom, just didn't want it to go wrong. So I've actually just done some snips, but you will be able to see just that nice little 3-minute video. At TAFE Queensland Skills Tech, we have automotive, are our areas, light and heavy, building and construction from carpentry, plumbing, wet trades, manufacturing and engineering, from welding to fabrication, and everything to do with electronics, electrotechnology. I wanted to just go through the case study for transitioning to online. I thought what would be best is actually to go through what we did pre-COVID for our training and assessment delivery strategies, our online experience during COVID-19 lockdown, and 1 year on and what we've learned. So what we're going to do is actually talk about our students, our teachers, and at the end there is some supporting research for people that are interested. Talking about the student profile, the TAFE Queensland students profile, there's vocational education in Australia is actually post high school or post-secondary education. And at Skills Tech, our main areas of education are in what we call apprenticeships, which is a 4-year employment process, and the students come to us about every 6 to 8 weeks a year. So, so they learn on the job and then they consolidate that with us at TAFE Queensland. We also have what we refer to as post-trade, which are normally certificate 4 or diploma level training. I think this picture actually demonstrates our students' journey. This is from Broadwell's. So I think most of our students actually, when they come into TAFE Queensland Skills Tech, sit on level 2, unconscious incompetence. But by the time they actually get to their diploma level and certificate 4 levels and finish their apprenticeship, they are very unconscious and competence levels. Our TAFE teachers at TAFE Queensland, sorry, I'll go back, I'm one slide ahead. Our students, pre-COVID, we actually did, everything was really in face-to-face. We had classroom, practical areas, which were like simulated work environments, and theory classrooms. The students' training was very high level of teacher-guided learning with lots of peer support. We did do theory online, however, it was actually delivered in the classroom and supported by the teachers. TAFE Queensland actually has a system, an LMS system called Connect that we utilise, and that's actually is where we keep all our assessments, information, and our units of competency. The challenges. So for our teachers, our challenges during COVID was actually turning everything from a face-to-face classroom into a virtual classroom, such as Zoom, Adobe Spark. The creating of resources for online learning, so instructional videos, learning how to use virtual whiteboards, etc. Also, what was important during our COVID experience was actually our students. We did a lot of contacting our students to make sure that they were having no troubles getting online, things were working for them. It was also a really good way for our teachers to connect with our students and make sure there were no issues. We, of course, had counsellors available that the teachers then forwarded on to the counsellors for additional support. Also during that period with our teachers, they actually had to learn a lot from going from face to face. So they did a lot of peer learning. They did lots of individual research and sharing of the practices. TAFE Queensland did some amazing things in putting out micro-credentials, professional development on how to use Zoom, how to do videos, all of those sorts of things. And that was really successful. We also had an excellent IT system who just made everything work. They supported on getting everything online, making everything work. The other thing that worked for TAFE Queensland is we had people from our PD team actually come and sit with the people that were struggling about how to make Zoom, how to do all those things, because it was all a learning curve. The challenges to involve the students and motivate them to participate. So our virtual classrooms, we did lots of virtual classroom work. Here we've got actually Adam just doing like a bookwork, going through the bookwork, which you would normally do face to face, but here he's just doing it on Zoom. We did try and do a lot of flip learning, online virtual learning, voice to text functions. We used our learning management system a lot, and we also did training videos. Our training videos were actually sometimes very commercial, and sometimes they were very amateurish. So we actually did a lot of teaching our teachers, and the students loved the fact that we did videos that were just often done on the teacher's phone. It was very real, it was not professional, but it was the teacher, and was that connection with the teacher that was really important. What we did find is that students really appreciated it and connected really well with online, particularly with our checking on them. They loved, in particular, our videos that the teachers did. A lot of them were just done on phones, but they were very real. They were not professional, but the students connected extremely well with them. So that was one of our great learnings, that our videos didn't have to be of a high quality as long as they were real and they got through the information. So in summary, our TAFE Queensland's transition to online learning was a challenge because we did turn around or pivot within 2 weeks, and we were back and up and going there. But the upskilling of the teachers made it was at a great pace, but I think we've learnt so much and they have embraced it immensely, and they've realised that it's okay that things are not really professional, but they are real, and that's actually been very supportive. Just as a side note, also I have been in compliance. Our quality of education and the compliance has very much been maintained during this process. Thank you very much. There are some resources.
Thank you very much. That was great. Yes, we'll circulate the PowerPoint and the links at the end. And in the meantime, so we will have a speaker speak specifically about the trainer capability building experience from TAFE Queensland as well. So Shauna, thanks for, we can see your screen. Oh yeah, no, all good. And but just saying at the higher level of transitioning to online, we now have Rosalie Colnane, who's the senior educator at TAFE Queensland, talk about delivering and assessing competency-based training in an online blended format, and what sharing some experiences there. As we all know, our area is quite practical, hands-on, so how to keep that experience and that format in an online or blended format. So Rosalie, the floor is yours. We can see your, if you could make your PowerPoint maybe a screen wide.
Sure, sure. So we're still on a share screen, are we?
Yes,
Awesome.
you can still see your
Okay.
screen, and if you could just make it
I will start the slideshow.
exactly, start the slideshow, that would be wonderful.
Awesome. Awesome. So buenas tardes. This is my whole Spanish vocabulary. So this is it. Buenas tardes, ¿cómo está? Mi nombre es Rosalie. Thank you so much for allowing me to join with you this afternoon. I feel it's an enormous privilege to be able to talk to you about delivering and assessing competency-based training in an online and blended format. I have a personal philosophy about education, and I'd like to share that with you so that as an introduction to who I am. I genuinely believe that it is through education that individuals and communities and countries have the opportunity to be the best they can be. And because of that, I feel every day that I am privileged to be able to teach TAE, which is our certificate in training and assessment. And I was able to deliver that in Chile as well, which was an amazing experience. As well as our international program, which is international skills training. They are very similar, but in my experience, the international skills training program is developed specifically for international cohorts and for international or for countries to develop their own competency-based training and assessment programs. And in that respect, I feel it is a wonderful product, and we've had enormous success with its delivery thus far. So in this session, I would like to just give you an overview of what I would like to talk about today. I briefly want to talk about the key features of competency-based training and assessment, because it is through that everything else hinges for us as a trainer. And then we'll have a look at the virtual, blended, and flipped learning strategies that we use, and as well as how we manage that learning and assessment in a virtual environment, and as Shona said, keep to that standard that we're looking at. Peter Drucker is a preeminent educator and business person, and he said that learning is a lifelong process of keeping abreast of change, and the most pressing task is to teach people how to learn. And certainly in education, in the TVET sector, this is one of our biggest challenges, because our learner often comes to us disenfranchised from education. They've gone through primary school and high school and have, because they learn differently to how a lot of traditional schools teach, that they feel like they're not intelligent, they're not capable, when in fact they actually are. It's been the school that has let them down. And so what I love about competency-based training is that we are student-centric. Everything is about the student, and everything that as we build things and all the guidelines that we use are about supporting the student and helping them become competent or capable, and for them to realize their potential. Competency-based training has two assessments. It's always skills and knowledge. So we are led by units of competency, and those units of competency identify what skills, what should that learner be able to do, and what should that learner, or what must that learner know in order to perform their task to industry standards. And in that way, we get a student who can do the task, but also is encouraged to learn and keep growing within their industry. Competency-based training gives us two attempts at an assessment. So it's not a case of you pass or you fail, you are successful or you are not yet successful. And it is our task as an educator to support the learner to go through and understand where they've gone wrong and improve their skills. So we also see failure, if you want to use that term, as an opportunity to learn. And so we try and turn their mindsets around and encourage them. I will skip this slide because we'll talk about it as we go, but essentially what we're saying is that those units of competency that I was talking about before direct us what to create as an assessment tool, and that in turn directs the learning. What is important to us, and it is perhaps the key thing, are the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. These direct us, they guide us, they become our touch points for every time we develop an assessment tool, every time we review an assessment evidence, if we're not sure that these are the points that guide us. And so they are really important. The principles of assessment always ask us, is the assessment valid? Is it reliable? Is it flexible? Is it fair? So valid means, is it relevant to industry? Is it at the same right level for that learner? Is it reliable? So this means that if a different person marks that assessment, will you get the same outcome? So it's not about who marks it, it is about what the assessment is covering. And that should relate back to that unit of competency. Is the assessment flexible? So flexible means, can we apply reasonable adjustment? Can we adapt the learning situation to meet the learner's needs? And this is where virtual training has become a really important aspect. In being flexible, it means that we can contextualize learning, make it relevant to that learner's work environment or location. Like Chile, Australia, Queensland is very long. And so we move from a tropical zone to a subtropical zone to desert. And so we need to be able to contextualize the learning to make it relevant for them, just as you do in Chile. And then the last thing is that assessment that we deliver and have built, is it fair? So are we making sure that every student, no matter their age, their gender, their how tall they are, if they've got a disability that doesn't impact on them performing the task in their workplace, have they got the opportunity to pass? And that's a really important thing for us as well. The rules of evidence really relate strongly back to an RPL. Or recognition of prior learning. So this is when somebody who has been in the industry for a long time has those skills and knowledge, but maybe needs the piece of paper to support that. So they supply us with evidence. And the question we ask with that evidence is it current? So is it less than 3 or 4 years old? Is there enough evidence for us to be able to make a judgment and go, yes, they can do the job to industry standards? Is the evidence valid? Does it relate back to what the unit of competency directs us to have? And is it authentic? Is it their own work? So they are essentially the key elements that we look at, and then we can apply it to those virtual and blended delivery strategies. So pre-COVID, I've got to be honest, we were really reluctant about using virtual deliveries. We didn't feel it would work. We didn't think, we felt that it was going to make teachers redundant. And so there was a lot of negativity around it, but COVID forced us to jump in and take a deep breath and get there. And we found instead that we became increasingly important. Our team started to use Zoom, and we love Zoom. We found it was great because we could interact with our students. We have mics on, we have things going just as if we were in the classroom. We could share a whiteboard. So and the whiteboard had markers. It's really cool. The whiteboard have little markers that says who's writing what on the board. So if we find that someone's not participating, we can encourage them to participate. We can embed videos, we play games, we can use the chat bar, we can have polls. There are many, many things that we can do in order to make that learning environment, while remote, really rich. And the thing that it does way better than a classroom environment is that we can record it. So if a student can't come, if a student's running late, if a student's not really understanding what's going on and needs to review content, then they can play it back and they can review it as often as they need to in order to have a good learning experience. So in that respect, we find it a really wonderful learning environment. We also have started to embrace, or some ahead of the others, but we are finding that there are wonderful technologies that allow us to take demonstrate how to put an instrument together or take it apart. And so we video these, give them to the students, and again, they can take it away and they can take a piece apart or put it back together again. In this case, the image that I've shown you is of a plumbing on 3 levels. And so we've been able to take the walls away so that the students can see what it looks like with the walls gone, and so they know what they're looking for and what they should be creating. And again, this makes for a much stronger learning opportunity than rather than showing them the wall and then going behind that wall, by the way, are all these pipes. So again, we're finding that we use that sort of thing in a blended environment where we use both technology and teacher guidance, but the student can take it away, or sometimes we will send it beforehand in like a flip situation where we send technology, or we send students information about what we want them to do beforehand. So they come to the class prepared, they come to the class able to have a discussion rather than being passive learners. And adult learners enjoy being active learners and involved in it. So we find that really successful. We also have a range of different kinds of simulated workshops. So this one is particularly about nursing, where the gentleman on the outside of the window can actually control what that dummy is doing. So he can make that dummy have a heart attack. He can make them do all kinds of things so that he can demonstrate and test a learner in a real life situation without putting someone at risk, which, you know, is a good thing. At Skills Tech, if you recall, Shona showed you some images, and they are our work areas. So they are simulated workshops. They are 1/8 in size, but the students get to do exactly what they would do in the workplace, but in a smaller environment and safer. And so again, they start getting real life experience and they start building skills, and we can start talking to them about knowledge and techniques and things like that. So the learning becomes a lot more valuable. One of the things that I'm super excited about at the moment is augmented reality. And it can be developed in a number of different ways. What we find with augmented reality is that once that student puts those goggles on, they are there. They are 100% present. And whatever is happening in those goggles is their whole world. So what that means in reality is that they're not thinking about the weekend. They're not trying to sneakily look at their phone and check their texts or their Facebook. They are there and they are learning and they are concentrated. So the outcome from that, which is fantastic, is that they learn quicker. They learn better because it is an environment that they are comfortable with. And then we find that in techniques where there is a level of danger. So we use it for work health and safety when they're working from heights. They can start seeing what those risks and hazards are. We use it in welding. So in the welding augmented reality, we find that the students come out with a higher level of proficiency very quickly. There are fewer accidents. There is a better standard of work. And with some of the augmented reality products, we can actually have a printout of what they've done, what their standard is, and they start competing with the person next to them. So there is that level of gamification. He's doing better than me. I'm going to do this again and show them that I'm as good as they are. And so we have a much better outcome. One of the things that we're also looking at, and it's a snip here, but on the reference page at the end of the slideshow, I have a link that you can go and have a look at. And what I'm really excited about this is that this is a 360-degree camera. One of our teachers, Adam, took 30 minutes to build this learning device. So if you see a little yellow spot, that is an anchor point, and it means that the student can walk around that environment, click on the anchor points, and it will drop down information, and it will tell them what that's about, or what they need to learn, or what they need to do. Whatever we want them to do, we can embed into that link, and we can add in videos. So if they get to a point where they need to attach something, you can drop in a video that they can see what needs to be attached where, and it makes that learning so much more realistic for them. So lots of things that we can do. This particular 360-degree camera strategy is not as expensive, and we can add little cheap 3D, little cheap augmented reality goggles, and then they have an augmented reality environment as well. So it's a lot more flexible, and it's easy for us as teachers to put these things together. When we deliver online, again, we had a concern that our product was not going to be up to standard, and Shona, as she spoke about, was involved with quality, and we are audited really regularly. So one of the things that we do when we develop our assessments is that we map. So the elements on the right-hand side are the assessments, and it shows exactly where within the assessments each of those parts of the unit of competency sit. So now we have sufficiency. We can see that it's assessed in a number of different ways, which suits a number of different learning styles. But it also means that we've met that requirement of being sufficient. All our assessments have benchmarks or marking guides. So our student would get the question, which is describe 3 subfloor details that help you establish the type of specialist preparation required. But the teacher gets a benchmark, and they can check the standard of the work. So now we have a consistent, and we're fair. We're not asking them to tell us things that they don't already know, but we're also making sure that that marking is consistent across the board, irrespective of who the teacher is. One of the assessment strategies that we use online a lot now is RPL. At once upon a time, we'd ask them to send evidence in, and we'd go through all of the evidence, and then we'd have a phone conversation, and it was sort of very disjointed. But now through technology, we can create a Zoom meeting, and we can say, look, can you demonstrate this to us? And so we can see them doing the task in real life, and we can have a conversation, and we can check their evidence and talk through it with them. And so we get a much better standard of outcome in terms of RPL. When we work in a learning management system, what we do is we upload everything that the student needs. We have individual caches or portals that the student is enrolled in, and a teacher manages each of those individual portals. As a teacher, we are able to track the student. We can keep an eye on them and see whether they are participating or not. So this student is doing really well, are happy with them, we'll leave them be, or maybe we'll send them an email and go, well done, you're doing really well, this is what I'd like to see. We also upload the assessment tools so that when they are ready, they can do their assessments. And in this case, because it's a practical task, we will have a checklist that they can see exactly what they have to do and the standard to which they need to do it. And it gives us an opportunity to give feedback to our student. In that online learning management system, which we call Connect, we communicate constantly. So we have a range of ways that we can communicate through to the group. And it can be through email, it can be through text messages, it can be through SMS. Normally what we as a teacher will do is we will talk to the students and go, what is your best communication strategy? Or we can communicate with them individually. So we can give them a grade, we can tell them how they've done, we can give them feedback and tell them what it is that we need them to do. We can also send them individual support items. So we might have a student who's struggling, this student was struggling with the QBCC Level 2 renovation and extension contracts. So I'll upload it for them so that they can have a look at them, review them, and go back to their assessment. So we find now that we have multiple ways of engaging our student and keeping them involved, educated, and feeling good about themselves. And a lot of them now go on to university and go on to higher level learning. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But all of it is a balancing act, finding the right assessment tool, the right strategy, the right way to communicate with our student. And so it is very much a recursive process that we need to go back to on a constant basis. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for your time today. As with Shona, I do have a reference list at the end so that if you want to go back and have a look at anything that we've talked about, I've put in links so that you can have a look at some of the video clips and things like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rosalie. That was, very stimulating and gives a lot of, hopefully, of ideas to our participants. So I did allow you to go a little bit overboard because it was so interesting, but because I note that so far we don't seem to have any questions, so we had a little bit of extra time. But please, everyone, there is another opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session. So if that's okay with Gabriela, who is a facilitator for the Q&A, and if I have seen correctly, let's maybe revert back to any questions we may have later in the session. Is that all right, Gabriela?
It's okay. I have some questions. Pero puedo esperar. No problem.
All right. So we have 3 minutes for one question, and then yes, let's try to fit some more questions. I think that Craig shouldn't take his whole time on the. So we have 15 minutes allocated. It's a quicker session, so we should be right with time. So yes, please, Gabriela, go forward with your question.
Shona, Rosalie, muchas gracias por compartir este viaje, ¿cierto?, que han hecho. Quiero hacer una pregunta, tal vez a ambas, ¿no? Se ha hablado mucho, tanto en las exposiciones de ustedes, acá también, sobre la capacidad que han tenido los docentes, los profesores para adaptarse a este cambio. Han hecho un gran esfuerzo y se ha notado, ¿no? Pero acá hubo una investigación que reunió a varios centros de estudios en Chile al comienzo de la pandemia, ¿no? Y decía que una de las principales dificultades que estaban teniendo los docentes no provenía de su capacidad adaptativa, sino más bien de la capacidad de adaptación de las instituciones, en el sentido de que se les pedía que diseñaran muchos instrumentos, se les pedía ser validados, se les pedía dedicarse mucho a la parte administrativa, ¿no? Y entonces ellos decían, nos falta capacitación en herramientas digitales y también nos falta orientación sobre cómo hacer la retroalimentación de los estudiantes. Entonces, escuchaba a Jonah hablar de esto, de la capacidad de los docentes, y también a Rosalie hablar de el feedback. Pero quisiera pedirles que detallen un poco sobre eso, que nos contaran la capacidad que tuvieron sus instituciones, los equipos que apoyan a los docentes, para ágilmente también reaccionar a esto, ¿no? Y sobre todo a Rosalie, quiero preguntarle, se habló de los principios de la evaluación, se habló de las reglas de las evidencias. Quisiera pedirte una opinión respecto a los principios o las reglas de la retroalimentación de los estudiantes, no solamente que ellos sepan qué les faltó por realizar, sino cómo realizarlo, ¿no? Y claramente estas tecnologías que hoy día están mediando la enseñanza, cómo aprovecharlas de la mejor manera para eso. Jonah, ¿quieres partir tú?
Oh, okay. Okay, so I will talk about the principles of assessment and rules, and perhaps some of the things that happen to us as a team, but I'll then let Shona talk about the administrative side and the management side. So we don't necessarily tell our students about the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. So that's not an upfront thing for them, but we use it on a reflection. And we use it to guide us when we build our tools. So everything we do is, as I showed you, with mapping, we also go through a validation process where we have external people have a look at things and check that they're up to standard. But when it comes to a student, if they're not performing to standard, or if they're struggling, then we apply the reasonable adjustment rule, which means that we can adapt our teaching strategy, or we can bring in external support to help them achieve their standard. Often we will, so a reasonable adjustment strategy that we've used, we find a lot of our students, while they use phones and things like that, are not really comfortable with technology and writing on a keyboard or anything like that. So we will allow a student to handwrite. So long as I can read it, I can mark it. I've had a situation where a student really struggled with writing, especially in one of the countries I worked with, not Chile, but they were really struggling with writing. So I would type out their assessments. I've had countries where I've let them write in pencil. So as a teacher, we have a lot of latitude in terms of how we support that student, so long as we support them, but we don't do it for them. Does that clarify things a bit?
Sí, sí. Un
Gracias.
poco, pero no quiero extenderme mucho más allá. Creo que lo aclara. También los docentes, ¿no? Hay una diferencia en dar feedback a los estudiantes presencialmente y en darlo de manera online, ¿no? Y cómo ha sido ese desafío. Pero podemos ir avanzando.
So Gabriella, often we will ring the student and have a chat with them, or we'll have a Zoom meeting. What we have found is that we spend a lot more time working with the student on a one-on-one basis in a virtual environment than in a classroom environment. So that is a teacher we love what we do, so that's good for us. I'll hand my mic over to Shona.
Sorry. So in regards to what we did for the staff, I know Tanya also from TAFE Queensland is going to talk about how we trained our staff, but I found that the staff really did take it on board. It was very interesting. A lot of them were very anti to begin with, but they eventually saw it as a positive. I think we gave them a lot of support, IT support, as well as professional development support. So sometimes people would peer support. So they would actually sit there and go, this is how you make a Zoom meeting. This is what you do. This is how we did a lot of that. Actually, I think the teachers came forward as teachers and not only to students, but to each other. Does that answer your question, Gabrielle?
And just to jump in as well, during the last webinar, we mentioned that TAFE Directors Australia has worked with TAFEs and collected information about transition to online through 2020, and we gave you references. We're happy to give that as well. And one of the things that came out is it was very important on how the planning at institutional level was done, and to have clear timelines, clear steps. And a lot of it was, of course, trainers and and student support, but there were other aspects as well, such as processes and and guidelines and more administrative or governance related changes that had been made to accommodate the transition to online learning. So indeed, that's another takeaway from the Australian experience, the importance of planning and communicating to all staff, not only trainers, but to all staff throughout the institute on what's going to happen and what is expected from them, and then supporting them in making it happen when they were struggling. So we can also share that, but for the in the interest of time, maybe if we could move on to the second session. And my apologies, I forgot to introduce Gabriela. So Gabriela Navarro is the Director Technical and Vocational Learning Pathways Programs at Fundación Chile. So my apologies and many thanks for accepting to take on the role of facilitator, but also asking questions, which is wonderful. So we will now move to the second session, which I think should be of interest because I understand that we have a lot of trainers online, and it is about building trainer capability for online and blended training. So I invite Tanya Vint, who is the Educator Capability Team Leader at TAFE Queensland Brisbane region, and she will talk about the strategies, talking of institutional level as well, the strategies for building capability for trainers and making things happen. Oh, Tanya, I'm so sorry. I'm just looking at my notes and I realized that your presentation is the kind of the key of that session, but we did think to talk with Craig about giving an overview first of who the trainer is in the first place and what are the skills to begin with before talking about online capability building. Sorry. So Craig Robertson is the CEO of TAFE Directors Australia, so of this peak body we represent. And we have, Craig, please, don't make me break my promise of this being less than 15 minutes if you can, and just give an overview of who is a trainer, what is a trainer profile, and what is the professional development we're offering in a standard manner in Australia, because that should inform them and make it clear for you to understand where this additional capacity building is coming from. So sorry about the mess up, and over to you, Craig.
Thanks, Eva. And for the benefit of everybody who's online, Eva works for me, but she very delicately gives me strong instructions. So I will keep this a short presentation for you. And again, it's great to be online with you and really appreciate the time of this, this dialogue. As Eva mentioned, really, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of what are the regulatory requirements and the professional development requirements that essentially governments in Australia require in the vocational education and training system, which of course has TAFEs as the centrepiece of that delivery. Let's just see whether my slide moves. There we go. All right. So what we've got in Australia is this notion of dual professionals. If you are going to be a vet or a TVET professional, particularly within a TAFE context, you come with two attributes. That is that you've got deep experience within the industry in which you will be delivering the vocational education and training program, but also you've got teacher capabilities. And that's really been demonstrated really well in some of the previous conversations. What do we mean by industry expertise or industry currency? If you are teaching in that area, you would be expected historically to have an equivalent or higher qualification. Maybe an example, if you're going to be teaching what we would call enrolled nursing in Australia, you would have a bachelor's in nursing or a master's in nursing, for example. But you can also be accepted that, particularly in areas where there hasn't been a training or a qualifications culture, that you've got relevant or industry experience. And that may well mean that you've been in business for a long period of time, and you know the industry, you know the process, etc., and you can come in and teach on that basis, because indeed that's what helps contextualise the approach, the pedagogical approach that plays out in vocational education and training. On the right, there is the teacher and the training attributes. It is a requirement under our regulation and our oversight that you hold at least what they call a certificate 4 in training and assessment. And I'll go on and explain that in a minute. Or if you've come from an education background, you've got a high level qualification in training adults. So you can bring that qualification to the process. Here is a sense when you do the certificate 4 in Australia, are really the 4 elements of the teaching process. It's the designing of the course, it's the delivery of the course, it's the assessment of the learning outcomes, and then it's the evaluation or review process. So all of these elements need to be demonstrated to a competent level for a person to become a trainer. If, for example, though, you have come in from outside, from industry, and you don't have this qualification, you can start teaching, but generally you teach under supervision whilst you undertake this qualification. There is not a sense in Australia of a pre-service qualification like there are in other countries around the world in coming into TVET. What do we do though when we think about industry currency? And it can play out in these 4 domains. When we think about new technology or new processes of working, because let's face it, almost every industry is going to be facing a transition in some shape or form, not only caused by COVID, of course, but the general trend of automation and digitization around the world. We always encourage in our TAFEs that there is a strong dialogue and engagement out with industry. And luckily, because there's a strong culture of placing students with industry, it is often the teacher that is the bridge that facilitates that. So they can keep across what's going on within their industry. We'd also be encouraging them, and I know this occurs in TAFE Queensland, for example, that our teachers engage in industry associations and the like. They receive newsletters so they can keep abreast of what's going on. We would also be expecting them, of course, in that context to be maintaining their contacts. And as I mentioned earlier on, because we have a strong apprenticeship culture here in Australia, where it's a structured learning program where they come off the job to TAFE, but mainly they're on the job, there is a strong expectation that the trainer is visiting the student in the workplace. And so therefore, through that dialogue, that exchange, etc., they can keep abreast of what's going on in that particular industry. Then we expect them all to keep across what are legislative changes, because our graduates go into industries, many that are what we would consider to be highly regulated industries, for example, building and construction, particularly where public safety is concerned, or in the health, allied health areas, and in community services. It's very important that people are abreast of what the regulatory changes are in terms of practice, and so that therefore they can make sure that that practice is reflected in the teaching and training that they undertake. And then, of course, it's important that if there is real changes in skills and approaches, that there are times when we release teachers to industry, and so that they can keep abreast of what's going on. Generally, in the TAFE sector, teachers are allowed to have second areas of employment, and that's often so that they can continue to be embedded in the industry in which they teach. So in essence, by law, the Australian providers must demonstrate that they contribute to their trainers' professional development in the areas that I mentioned earlier on. Some institutes, particularly the TAFEs, as they are large organisations, have quite strong internal professional capability development mechanisms. And one of the things that's arisen out of 2020 in particular is a new sweep of capability, or a new suite of capability within our trainers, and that's particularly around how to engage with learners in a connected way. One of the earlier presentations talked about or mentioned what we call IST, or the International Skills Training. One of the difficulties that we have when we often try to work overseas is to deliver an Australian qualification, there is quite a lot of regulatory overload that is associated with that, and often makes it quite difficult to connect and in fact to deliver, to be able to meet those regulatory requirements. So what the Australian government has developed is these training courses, these international skills training courses, particularly in the areas of training and assessment, that have all of the attributes of the Australian qualification, but not the regulatory overload. And so in essence, what happens is experienced TAFE practitioners can come and deliver the core of the teaching and training process. And you can, teachers can then learn what is the model that operates in Australia, what are those key pedagogical elements that Australian TAFE teacher will have. And so that's an Australian government endorsed process where we can come through and provide that sort of support. So hopefully, Eva, I've stuck with my time limit, and I'll leave it at there. Thank you very much.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks very much, Craig. And hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of where we're starting from, so that there is, professional development embedded in the Australian TVET system, and teams specifically dedicated to professional development. And so our second speaker for this session, Tanya Wind, is one of these educators, and she will tell us what has happened and how this upskilling provided to trainers to teach online has taken place at TAFE Queensland, and some lessons learned there. So Tanya, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. It's been very interesting listening to all the speakers today, and I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity to share our experience on transitioning and supporting our educators into the online or remote environment. So I'm going to share how we went about enhancing training capability for online blended learning in what was a very rapidly changing industry environment. So in my topics that I'm going to cover today as part of this session, I'm going to briefly touch on TAFE Queensland's Educator Capability Framework. So I lead a team in the Brisbane region, and we deliver training to about 900 educators. So we're quite a large region, and we have a diverse group of programs that are delivered as part of that. So we're going to go through that framework that we use as part of the delivery of our professional development. Then I'm going to look at or share with you how we went about building educator capability in the online learning environment. And I'm sort of going to focus on three key areas: training, coaching, and communication. Also, just wanted to let you know that some terminology today, we use the term educator in TAFE Queensland, but that's used interchangeably with trainers, facilitators, or teachers. Sometimes I might use the term learner, well, that's a student as well. If you see anything on my slides, may have some acronyms there. TQ is TAFE Queensland, and the ECF is our Educator Capability Framework. So first of all, I'm going to cover off quickly on the TAFE Queensland Educator Capability Framework. This framework sets the standards for our learning and teaching. So it sets the skills and knowledge benchmark for our teachers, because we want to focus on giving our students some quality educational outcomes. So it sits strongly within our strategic framework as an organisation. For the educator, it gives them the opportunity to identify where they might have experience that, to me, would be educational excellence. And we might actually get our educators to actually work and mentor other educators. Also, it allows them to identify professional development pathways to sort of build their capability. This framework has been in practice for almost 5 years now. So it's something that's been developed by TAFE Queensland, and it's got 8 domains of learning. So professionalism and core values, learning and teaching, assessment, innovative product and practices, learning industry and community engagement. And Craig's talked about how our educators need to be industry current, quality and compliance, and educational leadership. The domain I'm going to be focusing on today was technology for learning. So within each of these 8 domains, there are skill sets or skill areas that we want our educators to focus on. Every time I run a professional development event, we actually link the professional development activity to this educator capability framework. All right, so the business disruption that was brought about with COVID-19. I was saying earlier today when we came on a little bit earlier that it's actually created a commonality of experience across the world. And everyone had to quickly move to, I guess, a new way of doing many things, and one particularly in the educational environment in our region and also in TAFE Queensland across the board. So alone, from the period of March to June, we ran 424 professional development activities. We had 5,042 attendees, and you'll see with those attendees that it's not just our educators, but it's also our students. Because I think earlier, Shona and Rosalie were talking about, you know, it's not just our educators who had to build, I guess, an understanding of delivery in this new environment. We had to work with our students as well. One of the key things that we focused on in any professional development activity we delivered, we had to be modelling what we were asking our trainers to do, what we were asking them to do with their students. That was a really important activity, or I guess guideline for us and our team. It was interesting, Craig had just mentioned about the certificate for having those key focus areas around planning, delivery and assessing. And that's very much the approach that we took with the type of training that we focused on. It could be broken into 3 broad areas. One was planning for online delivery. So looking at, and Rosalie talked about this, looking at what we did before and what we're going to be, how can we make that transition? How can we change our lesson plans? How can we use the tools that are available to us to deliver in that online space? And that planning was very important. Then how we go about engaging our learners, monitoring their progression, monitoring their engagement, those sorts of things. And then lastly, assessing learners online. And I guess as part of that, we had 2 quotes in my team that we sort of reflected on, is that technology doesn't teach. It's still the teacher that's the key. It's the teacher that teaches. And the other thing was, in the online or remote learning environment, students can become or can feel quite isolated and disengaged. So those 2 quotes were always back of mind of the work that we are doing or the training that we're delivering to our teachers. In TAFE Queensland, whether it's a face-to-face session or whether it's an online or blended mode delivery, we want to create connected classrooms. And we can break that down into, I guess, 3 focus areas, and technology kind of enabled that for us. So collaboration. So we still want to give students the opportunity to have that peer-to-peer learning experience. So that was making sure that when we planned our lessons, Zoom, which was our delivery platform or virtual delivery platform, did we use breakout rooms, create activities where students could come together and learn from each other. Also, it's about using some of our LMS tools. We've got Connect Chat, so you could go online, present some content to our students, and then go offline, to reduce that screen time with the students. We all need to have, I guess, take some time out, but they could be working on an activity but still connect with us through Connect Chat. So Connect is our learning management system, and I think Rosalie and Shona spoke about that before. Also discussion forums. So using the tools that were available to us. Communication, and I think Shona really spoke about that before. Communication was a really important, I guess, pathway to keep our students engaged. So whether we communicate with them using email, instant messaging, Connect Chat, texting them, communicating with them as individuals or as groups as well, and creating that community connection. And as I said before, everything we did with our we wanted our teachers to do with our students, we practiced what we preached with our educators as well. So sometimes if I was working late and I was on the learning management system and I could see which teachers were online, I'd actually instant message them and say, hey, just letting you know I'm here. Have you got any questions? So creating that community. All right, so some of the actual sessions we delivered, so planning for online delivery, taking that lesson plan and working with teachers around what could they use in the synchronous, the live learning experience versus the asynchronous learning experience. Making them think about what are the skill levels of our students. We certainly have some cohorts of students where people are not confident in their digital skills. So we had to be very mindful of that as to what tools we were asking our students to use. I loved the instructional videos, and just further supporting what Rosalie and Shona said is that keeping it real. Students want to see you as a teacher. So we got our teachers to create short, sharp videos. It didn't matter if it wasn't professional and perfect. In fact, the students preferred that because you're keeping it real. And the other thing is collaboration within your team. When we're delivering to our students, we might be delivering one subject, but they're part of a broader qualification. So it was the team sitting down together and working out what digital tools or what strategies would we be used with our students across the qualification. And I guess that consistency for the students created some safety and confidence for them when they were also transitioning to a very new environment. All right, the engagement of our learners online. So again, thinking about connection. So got our teachers to do videos to say, hey, everything's okay, and just to reassure the students. So creating regular Zoom sessions, regular check-in sessions, collaboration, as I said before, creating those engaging sessions where the students still had that peer-to-peer learning experience. and that community. So making, you know, students feel like they were part of a community. Simple things like making sure they had their photos up on their Zoom profile, on their learning management system profile, introducing themselves, because we we transitioned and some students had just commenced, so they didn't have that opportunity to meet students in their other cohorts. So it's really important to create that feeling of community in the groups. So the sort of sessions that we delivered as part of that, hints and tips for week 1 of online delivery. It's like getting off on the right foot. We encourage teachers to use the Adobe suite of products. You know, we had a 200% engagement with that particular product, and students, because it's quite an easy to use technology, and it creates very engaging experiences in terms of content presentation for students. Making sure we use all the Connect tools, discussion forums, e-badges. It's something simple, like if a student posts to a discussion forum or completes a quiz, yes, they get a satisfactory result, but they also get a little e-badge that can actually sit against their profile in the learning management system. Obviously for teachers, it was quite new, so creating opportunities for them to practice facilitating online, because it is quite a different, I guess, way of delivering for many teachers, and they didn't always have a lot of confidence in terms of their digital skills. Managing student behaviour, just as critical in the online environment as in face-to-face. So we needed to create some student expectations for behaviour in the online space. And one was simply no student could enter without using their full and correct name. Because we did have an experience, and I'm sure it was worldwide, there were some Zoom bombers. And I actually saw one of those instances in the classroom, and I can say our teacher handled that very well. Monitoring academic progression. So making sure educators are still engaged. Educators are still engaging our students. So creating some touch points for what we call formative activities, not what we call summative assessment, but formative. So checkpoints through the learning to see, you know, if a student hasn't completed a quiz or if they haven't actually posted to a discussion forum, that told the educator that I probably need to follow up with that student and check in with how they're going. Assessing online. So that was something that was a real challenge. And it was wonderful to see some of the examples that Rosalie shared in the trade space of using that virtual reality or augmented reality techniques. So teams had to sit down and work out what actually could we actually assess online. And sometimes it wasn't possible. So, or they also had to think about, well, were there alternative ways that we can actually follow this through? What digital tools could we use? Could we get students recording themselves? You know, and a range of other tools that they could use. Also, I think it was highlighted, it was, I guess, a bit on what Gabriella's question around feedback. You know, we actually worked really hard with our teachers on creating that feeding forward technique. So, for example, we often know the problem areas that our students have because of our past experience. Are there some extra resources or tools that we could give our students prior to their assessment to focus their, I guess, their studies, to make sure they had practiced that skill or to make sure they'd reviewed that piece of content? So we worked really hard on that. And of course, applying reasonable adjustment. You know, no matter what our learning environment is in TAFE, it's very important we have that inclusive experience for our students. So I said there were 3 key areas that we focused on: training, and the other was coaching. So for those teachers that were not confident with using digital platforms, we actually created small coaching groups where they could support each other. So there was a bit of peer-to-peer mentoring or buddying up in Zoom sessions until they created confidence. Also, we had a digital delivery help desk. We're a small team of 4 people, but we basically went online and jumped into it. Any teacher who was not feeling confident with the technology, helping them troubleshoot. And that digital delivery help desk gave teachers confidence. And sometimes just knowing it was there was just as important as accessing its support. We also created a one-stop shop. So the one-stop shop was a place all teachers could go to, and they could find out all the resources that related to online learning. So for example, it could be something around quality outcomes. So, you know, I think Craig mentioned that there was some adjustment to, I guess, the regulatory bodies in terms of what we needed to do in the COVID-19 pandemic. So we actually communicated that and shared that information with our educators through this one-stop shop. It's based in the cloud, so they could be at any location and access the information. If they couldn't attend a training session, we recorded it so they could go in and actually have a look at the recording. Even if they attended, they're so overwhelmed with information, they could go back and review it. And again, we're modeling what we're asking them to do with our students. We used instant messaging. So as I said before, if I saw a teacher's online, I do a check on how they're going. We used, we could communicate with individuals and also groups of teachers, particularly teams that we knew would be struggling during this transition to online. And also the Connect Analytics. So they actually helped us look at what learners were engaging with. And in this case, it was our educators.
So Tanya,
Almost finished. One more slide.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, just mindful of time. Thanks.
Yep, thank you. So we created some artifacts to share with our teachers that they could put or share in their classrooms. So online etiquette for our students, Zoom rules for getting the most out of e-learning, instructions for students on how to use Zoom, and also just reminders of what to do when they're actually in a learning space. And that's it. So thank you very much for your time today, and happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Tanya, for the very rich presentation. And I'm sure that that will stimulate and launch a discussion with our Chilean partners and friends. So I'll pass over to Hernan to facilitate the discussion panel coming up. Thanks.
Muchas gracias, Iva. Bueno, creo que hemos tenido una tarde apretada de muchas cosas muy interesantes. Agradecerle a nuestros amigos de Australia la experiencia de Jonah, Rosalí y Tania desde una óptica, yo diría, de aplicación, de estar ahí como en la implementación de distintas dimensiones, motivados por toda esta situación de pandemia y la transición hacia la educación online, y también a Craig sus comentarios sobre los elementos de la política pública, sobre todo referido en este caso a docentes y que soportan el desarrollo de capacidades en los docentes de una perspectiva también de desarrollo profesional. Pero bueno, tenemos acá dos muy importantes amigos, Catherine Flores, que es coordinadora académica de CFT en Valparaíso y viene en representación de los CFT estatales, y Gonzalo Tomarelli, que viene en representación de Vertebral, pero además rector de IPLASEX. Entonces, vamos a hacer un panel muy efectivo, porque tenemos que terminar a las 7:30 con algunas conclusiones. Entonces, yo diría, para resumir y para entrar en la conversación, yo diría que las presentaciones que hemos escuchado han habido como tres grandes ámbitos de temas. Uno es lo que tiene que ver con la experiencia del estudiante. Hemos escuchado bastante de aquello. El estudiante está como al centro de la mirada, ¿no? Hemos hablado de engagement del estudiante, de las distintas maneras en que podemos retenerlo, porque en una educación online podemos perder contacto con él, y vimos en la reunión, en el webinar anterior, que en el caso de Chile eso implica que ese alumno puede desertar, y es un alumno vulnerable además, y eso puede traer muchas otras consecuencias en su vida. Entonces, la verdad que todo este tema del estudiante y el engagement del estudiante es un aspecto central, y por supuesto los aspectos pedagógicos para que su aprendizaje sea fructífero. El segundo gran tema que se ha hablado son los docentes, ¿no? Y cómo el sistema, a nivel de sus instrumentos permanentes de política pública, tiene un marco de cualificaciones aplicado a los docentes también. No tenemos nada como eso acá, que quizá es una lección interesante empezar a notar. No solamente marco de cualificaciones para los sectores productivos, sino que para el mundo de la docencia, ¿no es cierto?, técnico-profesional, y también la preocupación por el docente, ¿no?, por contenerlos, por darles confianza, por apoyarlos, por coachearlos, etcétera, etcétera. Y el tercer ámbito que hemos hablado, que me parece muy interesante que haya ocurrido esto, se mencionó, pero yo diría que menos, y que es la tecnología. Y aquí hay dos cosas que creo que lo mencionó Tania, que me pareció muy interesante. Dice, bueno, la tecnología no enseña, enseñan los profesores, primera cosa. Y la segunda cosa que dijo, que también me pareció muy interesante, es que a los alumnos prefieren un video mal hecho por el profesor o no profesional, pero que lo conecte con ese docente. Y eso es mucho más importante que un video súper acabado, con un profesor muy experto en tecnologías digitales. Entonces, dicho esto, yo quisiera concentrar los comentarios, dejemos la tecnología fuera, porque la tecnología, bueno, es un medio nomás, y concentrémonos en docentes y en alumnos. Entonces, mi primera pregunta para Catherine y Gonzalo es que nos comenten sobre el trabajo con docentes. O sea, qué desafíos ustedes han encontrado en esta etapa de transición, que en Chile, bueno, va a ser más larga que en Australia, y qué lecciones han ustedes aprendido ya a estas alturas de la pandemia. Catherine.
Gracias, Hernán. Bueno, gracias también a don Manuel Farías, ¿cierto, presidente, por la confianza de estar acá también. Así que muchas gracias. Y en nombre de los CFT estatales te puedo comentar que la experiencia que hemos vivido ha sido increíble, porque yo creo que el valor que tienen nuestros docentes, nuestros académicos, ¿cierto?, ha sido a toda prueba. Primero, todas las experiencias que he podido levantar en este tiempo antes de llegar hasta acá ha sido de que los profesores han estado a la altura, primero, como en todas partes, igual que en Australia, como he podido ver. Si bien las herramientas no las han manejado, y nuestros docentes tienen todas las instituciones del CFT estatal, el 50% de los docentes trabajan en una sola institución, es decir, no trabajan en más instituciones de educación superior o instituciones de educación, de acuerdo a lo que informa CIES. Por lo tanto, eso significa, y además no tienen jornada completa todos, entonces por lo tanto, eso significa que además están muy vinculados con la empresa. Y eso es
Catherine,
importante, ¿sí?
Te pido un favor,
¿Sí?
le estamos traduciendo a los invitados, entonces habla un poquito más lento, claro.
Gracias, Hernán. Entonces, el hecho de que nuestros docentes estén trabajando, haciendo clases con nosotros, mayoritariamente un 50% de ellos exclusivamente en las instituciones, en una institución de educación, y además estén vinculados a la empresa, eso nos ayuda a transferir de mucha mejor forma el cómo realizar un aprendizaje mucho más significativo, que es lo que nosotros todos queremos, ¿cierto?, en el aula, en el ambiente de aprendizaje donde estemos realizando. Se han generado comunidades de aprendizaje, se han generado instancias que son desde la inducción de los modelos educativos, si bien los CFT somos distintos, ya somos autónomos, todos estamos basados en competencias, todos generamos un modelo de formación basado en competencias. Pero sin embargo, todos los modelos tienen ciertas distinciones. Pero una de las cosas que uno tiene que hacer al principio, y que nos hemos dado cuenta, es instalar el modelo educativo primero para tener un lenguaje común y para poder transferir este lenguaje de la mejor forma posible y que todos estemos hablando lo mismo, porque, como les dije, hay un 50% que está trabajando exclusivamente en una institución que es la nuestra, pero hay otro 50% que no, que está en otras instituciones de educación superior. Por lo tanto, hay una transferencia que puede venir, ¿cierto?, viciada también de otras instituciones. Entonces, por un lado, es la instalación de los modelos educativos en cuanto a hablar un lenguaje común y hacer esa transferencia lo más fiel posible. Lo otro es proveer la información y material de apoyo orientador al docente, que las instituciones de educación hemos tratado de proveer esta información lo más prontamente posible. Generar jornadas de planificación, porque estoy muy de acuerdo, ¿cierto?, con lo que decía Roselín, y las planificaciones son clave en el proceso, y Tania también lo dijo, son clave en el proceso, es decir, el alineamiento constructivo, que si bien se saltó la lámina, para nosotros es sumamente importante el alineamiento constructivo, el poder hacer esta planificación es clave. Y generar instancias de comunidad de académicos y docentes también es clave. Hay instituciones que lo han hecho por medio de Teams, han generado comunidades de aprendizaje donde se han realizado, donde ellos mismos han expuesto lo que están haciendo para poder aprender entre ellos, y estas comunidades han sido muy buenas, y además se han realizado tutorías a los docentes de forma más personalizada o grupos más chicos para poder apoyarlos en este proceso. Y lo otro, cierto, son los talleres que se han realizado de capacitación, que han sido relativamente frecuentes en base a una planificación de menos a más. Al principio ha sido más bien con herramientas muy básicas y después ha ido creciendo en la medida que se han ido instalando estas competencias y estas herramientas también como apoyo al proceso de aprendizaje, entendiendo que la tecnología no lo es todo, sino que es un medio y no un fin en sí mismo, y eso lo tenemos súper claro también en todos los CFT estatales. Así que por ahí te podría compartir lo que hemos ido haciendo entre los CFT estatales.
Perfecto, gracias, Catherine.
Entiendo.
Gonzalo, cuéntame cómo lo han abordado ustedes, quizás en dos niveles, quizás algo de Plasex, dado que trabaja mucho con modalidad blended online de hace tiempo, ¿no? Y por tanto una experiencia muy particular, y después quizás a nivel de las instituciones, ¿qué ha pasado con los docentes?
Sí, yo diría, Hernán, que desde la perspectiva de Plasex, lo que ha ocurrido a propósito de la pandemia es que ha sido como demasiado evidente que eso que a nosotros nos costaba explicar tanto a otras personas, que es la forma en que concebimos el rol del profesor, tiene que estar muy bien entendido si uno quiere hacer esta transición en el caso de los alumnos que estaban en modalidad más presencial o derechamente hacer educación a distancia. Entonces, para nosotros es muy importante, y fíjate que aquí me hace mucho sentido la lámina que presentó Craig respecto de las habilidades que tiene que tener un profesor. Nosotros distinguimos dentro del rol docente la idea del docente diseñador. Necesitamos que los profesores estén súper involucrados, no solo en la programación y la planificación de sus cursos, sino también en la construcción de los recursos de aprendizaje que son súper importantes en la modalidad a distancia. Todos estos videos, incluso experiencias de realidad virtual a las que se puede hacer referencia, son parte de la función de diseño de un profesor. Y probablemente una de las funciones que va a ir tomando más importancia en el futuro. Digamos, la función o el rol de provisión o delivery que señalaban en las láminas, va a tomar una importancia un poco distinta, va a estar mucho más asociada a la comunicación, a la colaboración, a la capacidad de que los estudiantes participen, formen estas comunidades, tengan ese engagement, que es un poco distinto desde la perspectiva presencial. Entonces, esa segunda función también es importante de entender y de ayudar y de capacitar a los profes. Hay una función de evaluación que toma otro sentido, en donde, por ejemplo, la importancia de los procesos de aseguramiento de la integridad de las evaluaciones a distancia es particularmente importante, y el desafío de evaluar competencias de los niveles superiores se hace más complicado. Para nosotros, además, hay un rol de ajuste, y que tiene que ver con la idea de la retroalimentación. Yo diría que ahí tenemos el desafío más grande en materia de crecimiento, de desarrollo de la función docente o de trabajo en los próximos años. Y a propósito de la cuestión del apoyo, nosotros tenemos una función de tutoría. Los profesores docentes se preocupan de darle seguimiento a los estudiantes más allá de la asignatura o la disciplina que estén cursando. En el último tiempo, por ejemplo, hemos tenido que darle mucha más fuerza al rol de apoyo socioafectivo que tenemos ahí. La pandemia ha sido ocasión de darse cuenta de que hay algunas cosas que se están poniendo más complicadas y hemos tenido que trabajar más con psicólogos. Entonces, hay 4 o 5 funciones docentes que superan lo que es la tradicional provisión, delivery, hacer clases, que tienen que entenderse para tener buenos resultados, y en los cuales hemos tenido varios aprendizajes. Yo creo que incluso, y con esto termino, hemos descubierto o implementado en el IPLASEX una nueva función docente, a propósito de todos los seguimientos que le podíamos hacer a los alumnos que estaban usando ahora las plataformas LMS mucho más activamente, instalamos como un mecanismo de seguimiento y monitoreo. Y nosotros podemos saber, bueno, cuántas veces se conectan los alumnos, los profesores, cuántos chats, cuántas comunidades se forman, cómo van las evaluaciones. Entonces hicimos como un sistema de monitoreo a través de las mismas plataformas con datos resumidos. Y hay un profesor en cada sede y en cada modalidad que va haciendo un coaching o un seguimiento a los grupos de profesores, que pueden ir desde algo tan simple como que tiene problemas de conexión y les damos un chip para que tenga una beca de conectividad si quiere, o alguna ayuda pedagógica para inscribirlo en el programa de formación y habilitación docente que tenemos, o soporte tecnológico, cosas así. En el fondo, y resumiendo, me parece que entender el rol y la función docente desde una perspectiva muy amplia y que necesita apoyos y esas habilidades que señalaba Craig, es algo que es uno de los desafíos importantes en la medida que vayamos avanzando hacia el uso de herramientas y tecnologías para educación virtual.
Ya, muchas gracias, Gonzalo. Una última pregunta a propósito de docentes, para ir después pasando al tema de los estudiantes. Justamente Craig planteó el modelo australiano de desarrollo profesional docente, que no es otra cosa que un modelo de competencias ordenado por niveles, etcétera, como ustedes conocen. No existe nada como eso en Chile, y por tanto la formación y desarrollo profesional de los docentes depende mucho de la institución en particular, que se debe dar de forma sumamente heterogénea. Entonces, yo creo que me gustaría, aprovechando que ustedes representan también aquí, en esta mesa, a las asociaciones que cubren el total de las instituciones de educación superior técnica en Chile, si no nos merecemos un sistema que establezca algunos estándares mínimos y también quizás focalice los procesos de desarrollo de capacidad en los docentes, porque no, por supuesto no basta, este es un prejuicio, esto ya no es así, pero antiguamente en TP decía, no, sí, él viene de la industria, así que con eso ya es suficiente. La verdad es que hemos visto que no es suficiente, que lo que tú mencionas a partir del rol es sumamente sofisticado en términos pedagógicos y en términos de la vinculación del docente con el alumno en este caso. ¿Qué ven ahí como desafío país en esta materia?
Yo creo, Hernán, que hay definitivamente hay varias experiencias que rescatar dentro del sistema de educación superior TP. Me consta, y yo he participado en varios programas bastante bien organizados, que se pueden ver en varias instituciones, en donde hay avances significativos, incluso algunos que se remontan a colaboraciones con Australia hace algo más de una década.
Sí.
Pero me parece que tenemos un desafío como sistema, y aquí, eso sí, quiero nombrar algunos ejemplos de cosas en que sí hemos avanzado. A propósito de la pandemia, el Ministerio hizo un convenio de colaboración con algunas instituciones, entre las que está iPlasex, y montamos un programa de cursos gratuitos, abiertos, de apoyo como introducción a la docencia en ambientes virtuales, por ejemplo, que fue súper exitoso. No está orientado solo a la educación TP. No me sé los datos de todas las instituciones, pero solo en los cursos del iPlasex, más de 6.000 profesores de distintos lados al menos loguearon una vez. En Vertebral, la Academia Vertebral es una iniciativa en la que ya hemos estado haciendo avances en términos de desarrollar programas de capacitación en temas que van desde lo docente, pero también a lo directivo, que yo creo que marcan un camino por donde deberíamos trabajar en la colaboración. Y finalmente, si todas estas cosas funcionaran, bueno, avanzar hacia un marco, a un propio marco de cualificaciones en esta materia, y ahí hay una pega, te devuelvo la pega para la fundación también. Pucha, ahí tenemos una pega, ahí tenemos un desafío.
Ya, gracias, Gonzalo. Catherine.
Sí, en ese sentido estoy de acuerdo. No tenemos profesionalizado el rol docente en la educación técnico profesional y en la educación superior en general. Está ligado más bien, a diferencia, ¿cierto?, de Australia, está ligado más bien a la experiencia y está basada en la experiencia que trae, y las instituciones de educación lo forman. pero no tenemos, por ejemplo, y entiendo que sí lo están trabajando, como dice Gonzalo, ¿cierto? No hay una homologación o una convalidación de estas credenciales que una institución le puede ofrecer a un profesional en otra casa de estudios, por ejemplo. No están convalidadas en sí, digamos, a priori. Y eso requiere un trabajo mancomunado y eso requiere un trabajo de un marco de referencia. En este caso nosotros, por ejemplo, voy a poner el caso del CFT estatal del CFT de la región de Valparaíso, nosotros medimos las competencias digitales de nuestros docentes en percepción con un experto en competencias digitales en base al marco de la DICOM europeo de competencias digitales para poder tener una base en base a la formación de competencias y podemos tener identificados los grupos para poder ir avanzando a niveles de este marco, ya que no tenemos un marco nacionalizado, institucionalizado. Entonces, como dentro de nuestro modelo están las competencias digitales, están las competencias tecnológicas, y una de ellas es las competencias digitales, porque la tecnología es mucho más amplia, nosotros nos aventuramos por ahí, pero es a falta de que no tenemos un marco de referencia, así que por lo mismo yo creo que sí, comparto con Gonzalo, yo creo que eso es algo que podría aportar bastante valor al sistema.
Perfecto. Oye, nos quedan 10 minutos, pero vamos a dejar 5 para el cierre, pero me gustaría que habláramos de los estudiantes. La semana pasada, tanto Manuel Farías como Juan Pablo de Vertebral nos contaron varias cosas como muy inquietantes, ¿no? Que la cantidad de energía que han tenido que dedicar justamente a los temas de engagement y retención de alumnos, particularmente, no solamente, pero particularmente aquellos que incluso están en su primer año y por tanto nunca han tenido la oportunidad, aquellos que están en cursos presenciales, de conocer sus instituciones, en fin. ¿Qué reflexión han hecho en las dos asociaciones respecto de este tema? El alumno como usuario y el viaje del usuario, como se dice en otras industrias, ¿no? Y en relación a eso también, las experiencias positivas que han tenido los alumnos, porque aquí había una cantidad de innovación impresionante que ustedes cuentan. Uno se pregunta, por ejemplo, si ese alumno va a estar disponible para volver a un sistema más o menos convencional, donde quizás sus necesidades propias importaban un poco menos. Entonces, yo no sé si esto también, si COVID y todo lo que ha pasado, va a poner a las instituciones de educación en un piso distinto desde el punto de vista de las expectativas de los alumnos de su aprendizaje y su experiencia en educación superior. Grande la pregunta, para tan poco rato, pero... Gonzalo.
Gran tema también el asunto de los estudiantes. Ya te comenté un poco del asunto del apoyo socioafectivo, que en el caso nuestro ha sido como bien importante. Me consta que ha sido una preocupación significativa entre todas las instituciones de Vertebral, y también podemos mencionar algunas iniciativas, reuniones de grupos importantes de directivos de Vertebral para analizar y estudiar estos casos. De nuevo, me parece que ahí hay una buena pega que estamos haciendo como institución. Tenemos que tratar de que a lo mejor sea más participativa. En las últimas semanas hemos estado conversando con los CFT estatales para incorporarse también en muchas de estas cosas. Por ejemplo, déjame contarte una cosa que para mí me pareció muy interesante, porque viene desde la perspectiva de quiénes son nuestros alumnos. A lo mejor te va a parecer raro, Hernán, pero nosotros no estamos habituados a que cambie el tipo de alumno que tenemos tan rápidamente, ¿ya? Y sin embargo, aunque a lo mejor no nos damos cuenta, adecuamos nuestras estrategias formativas al tipo de alumno que tenemos, ¿ya? La pandemia lo que hizo fue que un grupo de alumnos que estaba, en el caso de Iplasex, por ejemplo, en modalidad presencial, se tuvo que cambiar muy rápido a modalidad a distancia, ¿ya? Entonces, la primera reacción de nosotros dijimos, bueno, los alumnos a distancia requieren un tipo de estrategias, tenemos una matriz ahí que establece las estrategias dependiendo el nivel de las competencias, etc. Y lo aplicamos, dijimos, no es tan difícil, apliquémoslo. Al poco andar nos dimos cuenta de que el tipo de estudiante que elegía una carrera en modalidad presencial era distinto al que elegía la misma carrera en modalidad a distancia. Y un aprendizaje, por ejemplo, los alumnos que venían de la modalidad presencial tenían mejores resultados, se sentían mucho más cómodos cuando aplicábamos metodologías sincrónicas, que son más propias de la modalidad presencial, pero en contextos virtuales. Y así preferían, por ejemplo, las clases por Collaborate a las estrategias que usábamos en la modalidad de distancia para las mismas competencias. Súper interesante.
Claro.
Ahí lo que vimos es un cambio rápido en el tipo de alumnos que nos tiene que obligar a reaccionar desde la perspectiva instruccional para adecuar la estrategia al tipo de alumno. No sé si es lo que exactamente estaba pensando, pero...
Sí, total. Kate, en este caso, en los CFT estatales que están partiendo varios, están reclutando sus primeras cortes, ¿cómo han abordado este tema?
Sí, mira, puedo decir, bueno, que el año 2018 que vienen partiendo, ¿cierto?, los CFT estatales, que partió por ley 2016, el año 2020 que le tocó a algunos partir, junto con la pandemia, ni siquiera pudieron conocerse los estudiantes, ni los profesores, ni los académicos con los estudiantes. Entonces eso fue muy duro, de hecho los rectores así lo declaraban, y abiertamente, y recién ahora, con un poco de la apertura de la pandemia, con la fase 2, están empezando a llevar las clases en formato híbrido y se están empezando a conocer. Pero como es opcional para el estudiante, también existe cierta incertidumbre, cierto miedo de poder asistir. Entonces, estamos viviendo hoy en día en este momento de incertidumbre, de un poco del estudiante que está asistiendo a las clases, por lo tanto, lo llevamos también lo motivamos a que puedan tener más confianza en poder asistir, que las medidas de seguridad sí están previstas para poder asistir, y la idea es poder generar los espacios de aprendizaje lo más presencial posible en la medida que se pueda. Creo también, o más que creo, estoy segura que en el fondo que los recursos de aprendizaje van a ir en desarrollo progresivo, por lo tanto esto de formatos híbridos y del trabajo, de la forma, de la modalidad, ya sea presencial, formato híbrido o mixto, como dicen todos, va a llegar para quedarse, y eso significa que la forma de poder desarrollar una clase va a variar, o sea, los modelos curriculares, la forma en que se va a desplegar el currículum en los ambientes de aprendizaje, que ya no es el aula, ya solamente son hablamos de ambientes de aprendizaje, pero no sabemos cuál va a ser, digamos, van variando, tienen que cambiar y tienen que adaptarse. Y el estudiante requiere más mediación, cosa que pensábamos que podía ser más autónomo. Nuestro estudiante, en particular, el 80% de nuestros estudiantes pertenece al 60% vulnerable. Por lo tanto, para nosotros es un gran desafío que puedan superar todas estas barreras, ya sean de brechas generacionales, de brechas territoriales y de brechas socioculturales, donde la conectividad los ha golpeado bastante fuerte y que es el punto de inicio para poder generar todo lo demás. Después hablamos, obviamente, de que estén conectados primero, y después de que estén conectados, de poder generar un ambiente de aprendizaje que sea donde se dé el proceso, el ámbito y la dimensión pedagógica, y como decía Gonzalo también, la dimensión socioafectiva. Y si no están las dos, no va a haber aprendizaje. Entonces, si no hay aprendizaje, que es lo que nosotros, lo que nos dedicamos, no podemos cumplir la promesa. Así es que para nosotros es clave que nuestro estudiante, con nuestro perfil, con las características de nuestro estudiante, pueda en el fondo superar esas brechas y nosotros apoyarlo y mediar. Y para eso están todos los sistemas de apoyo y acompañamiento al estudiante, asuntos estudiantiles, psicólogas, personas que trabajan para poder apoyar al estudiante también desde el currículum. Y los profesores y los jefes de carrera, que yo creo que son clave porque han estado constantemente comunicándose con el estudiante. Es la primera cara hacia el estudiante y es el primer referente. Así que yo creo que aquí un reconocimiento también a todos nuestros jefes de carrera, de todas las instituciones de los CFT estatales, porque han sido clave en el proceso de poder mantener y resguardar que el proceso formativo se dé y que en las salas de clase también, y que nuestro estudiante esté conectado con nosotros.
Bueno, perfecto. La verdad es que es muy valioso escuchar a ustedes entre las dos asociaciones. Deben representar a más de, no sé, ¿cuántos serán? 500.000 alumnos, no sé la cifra hoy, pero fácil. Y muy importante las implicancias de lo que hemos hablado. Así que vamos a ir cerrando. Así que le voy a dar la palabra a Iva y ahí volvemos con unas reflexiones finales.
Wonderful, very stimulating discussion, and I'm happy to see that our, humble webinar has been able to bring some of these groundbreaking topics to the forefront of your conversation. So that's already, we see that as a positive of our collaboration. But I would like to pass the floor maybe to Craig and the representatives of the two associations to maybe do some closing remarks and talk further about how we could take that even further and identify some areas where we could continue some discussions and maybe do some common work. So I might pass over to Craig first and ask our two Chilean partners to close the webinar. Craig, very briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Eva, and thank you particularly to our colleagues from TAFE Queensland. That's really been incredibly informative and brings our reality to our conversations. So my deep thanks to them. Through these last couple of sessions, we have seen that there are some common challenges, but we probably have different instruments with which we approach those challenges, both from our curriculum or qualification design through to delivery, through to teachers and the like. So I think there's quite a range of areas where we can continue to work together. I noticed the question around do we have how can standards work consistently across a country? We have that here in Australia, but with the real chance out of those common standards that the quality of the teacher brings them to life for the student and for industry. So that would be a big thing that we would promote here. So look, we're really keen to continue the dialogue, continue to work. I understand there's also some interest in qualifications frameworks. I'd consider myself to be a bit of a geek. That's an English term for a nerd or whatever on qualifications frameworks. And so when you're ready to have that dialogue, very happy to do that. On that note, really thank you for everybody for participating, and particularly thank you to you, Hernan, and over to you.
If I may jump in as well and flag that TAFE Queensland and their wonderful experts, are also open for discussions on maybe the more institution to institution level. So we're really happy to facilitate any contacts you'd like to make with TAFE Queensland as a follow up of these webinars. So can I pass the floor, and then would you agree to pass the floor to our association representatives for some closing remarks? Wonderful. And we ask maybe Catherine to provide us with her thoughts.
No, muchas gracias. La verdad, yo solamente quería agradecer. Es una experiencia muy potente, muy buena el estar aquí escuchando a la experiencia de Australia, que tiene años. Piensen que nosotros como CPT tenemos 4 años, recién algunos, los más viejitos, y los más nuevos como el mío, digamos, CPT estatal de la región de Valparaíso, llevamos 2 años. Así que muchas gracias y bueno, nada, gracias.
Thank you. And Gonzalo.
Finalmente me gustaría felicitar el que podamos estar haciendo este seminario. Es muy bueno volver a darse cuenta todo lo bien que lo están haciendo en Australia y lo valioso que es la experiencia y todas las cosas que podemos compartir. Yo creo que hay mucho trabajo por delante que podemos aprovechar. Y tal vez una reflexión final que me queda de toda esta discusión es el desafío inmenso que tenemos por delante en términos de poder aprovechar esta pandemia como una oportunidad para incorporar tecnología a nuestros procesos formativos, para trabajar en el diseño de itinerarios formativos flexibles, para implementar lo que son estas ideas del Tíbet australiano en Chile con mucha más fuerza, porque la verdad es que si uno mira por ahí algunas cosas, lee, o no sé si conocen, hay algunos informes que hablan de que debiéramos estar un tanto pesimistas respecto a algunos resultados en el corto plazo, en materias de retención o en materia de aprendizaje. Ahí no sé si han revisado esos informes de la Fundación Lumina, que están redactados por el propio Yamil Salmi, que ha venido a ayudarnos algunas veces. Yo creo que esta es una gran oportunidad, yo creo que este es un cambio que viene para quedarse y respecto del cual vamos a aprender mucho y los más beneficiados van a ser los que aprenden. Entonces hay un desafío muy grande en entender y demostrar cómo es que estas cosas vienen a mejorar los resultados de aprendizaje, que es lo que nos tiene que preocupar.
Perfecto.
Yes, great remarks. And I would like to give the last word to Hernan, who has been a great, contact person and a great partner throughout that experience and for many years before that with TDA. So Hernan, if you could please close off this webinar and the webinar series, and many thanks again for all your help and support in making it happen.
Yo creo que es muy satisfactorio retomar estos diálogos Australia-Chile en materia de formación técnica. Ha habido un intercambio muy importante, se mencionó acá, ha habido entrenamiento a docentes acá desde hace 10 años, acuerdos entre instituciones, ha habido una serie de visitas técnicas en Australia, han venido para acá, hay algunas alianzas estratégicas instaladas ya en algunas zonas del país. O sea, creo que ha habido un enorme intercambio que solo puede favorecer a ambas partes, diría yo, en el caso nuestro, acelerar quizás ciertos aprendizajes. Y finalmente ahora también creo que una de las oportunidades que abre esta pandemia es que el contacto también es mucho más fácil, ¿no? Para aprender de Australia antes había que ir a Australia, que nunca es malo, por supuesto, todo lo contrario, o australianos venir a Chile. Por supuesto tiene limitaciones el contacto online, pero también abre muchas oportunidades. Y creo que la facilidad y también, ¿por qué no decirlo?, el bajo costo que para todos tiene hacer muchos webinars de intercambio ya a un nivel quizás de colaboración mucho más entre instituciones, con sistemas de traducción cada vez más eficientes, ¿no es cierto? De verdad que es una oportunidad extraordinaria de aprovechar. Quizás mi último mensaje acá y tiene que ver con tener a las dos asociaciones acá de la formación técnica superior en Chile, que seguramente muchos de estos esfuerzos, lo hablábamos la otra vez, tienen que ser llevados a cabo bajo el liderazgo de las propias instituciones que quieren ofrecer una mejor calidad educativa a sus estudiantes. Y yo creo que hay muchas cosas que las pueden mover las propias instituciones sin que tengamos que esperar demasiados cambios legales que siempre se demoran, ¿no? Son necesarios muchas veces, pero hay muchas cosas que se pueden hacer entre tanto, y hoy día creo que hemos hablado de tres muy importantes, las vuelvo a mencionar. El estudiante al centro, o sea, realmente la preocupación por el estudiante, su forma de aprender, su conexión emocional con el sistema, su salud, el docente como alguien que hay que apoyar, que hay que darle una estructura de aprendizaje continuo que le permita ir creciendo, que hemos hablado de eso a propósito de lo que planteó Craig, y la tecnología, que siendo un medio, es un medio que abre enormes oportunidades y yo creo que todavía falta mucho para que sea totalmente transparente, que no se note, ¿no? Y que esté realmente al servicio de la pedagogía. Así que creo que son tres ámbitos donde quizás se pueden iniciar diálogos muy fructíferos entre ambos países. Así que muchas gracias a todos ustedes, también a Gabriela, que nos acompaña acá, a la experta australiana, Craig y Iva, por todo el esfuerzo de organización de estos webinars. Muchas gracias.
Chao, muchas gracias a todos.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Thanks for your time, spending an extra few minutes for the closure, and we're wishing you a lovely evening in Chile and a lovely start of the day here in Australia. Bye.
Okay. Chao, chao.